Hi, thanks so much for joining me. So I'm filming this video mid-November, so it's not quite the end of 2023, but I'm going to have a lot going on in December, so I don't think I'm going to get a lot of reading done. And then I am reading some good books now, but I decided that if for some reason the books I read at the end of November and December are so great, I'm going to make a separate video. Okay, so far in 2023, I read 59 books. And basically, I also want to say that I'm a huge DNFer. I do not finish quite a bit. So I wrote a quick list of all the books I DNF'd, and so I DNF'd 77 books. So some of those could have just been one chapter, some could have been one page, some could have been half of a book. And if not, what I've learned this year is that I want to focus more on quality, not quantity. I had this goal in 2023 of beating my 2022 reads. I wanted to get a higher number of books, and I realized that really wasn't a nice goal for me because I ended up with a lot of books that, out of this almost 60 books, a lot of them were not 5-star reads. And a lot of them, when I made this video, I had a really hard time coming up with this list. Some of them I absolutely adored. But then some of them I had trouble remembering. So that was kind of how I made this list of my favorites from 2023. The most memorable books I read. And specifically more writing style over plot, more prose over plot. So I want to go ahead and get started. And as you know, if you've been following me for a while, I read a mixture of adult fiction, mostly literary fiction, middle grade fiction, some YA, chapter books, picture books. Yeah, let me just get started and then I'm going to talk about everything. Okay, I'm going to say my favorite book for last of the year. And I don't think anything will change that in November and December. Okay, the first book is adult fiction. I'm not sure if it's literary fiction or historical fiction, but it is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. And this book is based on a protagonist who is referred to as the Count. And he's this kind of wealthy guy, he's a count, and he's stripped of his wealth. And he has to go live in a hotel because basically there's all this political things going on in Russia in the 1920s, and he's 30 years old, and basically he has to be under house arrest in that hotel. Now, I'm not a person who likes to read a lot of historical fiction or history. It's not that I'm opposed to it. It's just it just so happened to be that I really connected with this story because of the Count. And I felt like he was a very warm character. I really paid little attention, whereas someone might pick up this book for the opposite reasons, but I really paid little attention to all the political corruptness and all the political craziness going on at the time, which is a part of the book. But for me, the central part of the book was more of a character study of the Count and how he handles living in this hotel, from having a life of a well-traveled man, well-traveled man who was wealthy, but yet he's very humble. He's not, even though he grew up wealthy and he's a count, he's very humble, he's very polite, he has very good manners, he treats everyone equally, he ends up even himself working at the hotel, and it's just this story about his life over decades. It is you could tell very well researched, very intellectual. I really connected with the Count, and he's one of my favorite characters, and that's why I picked this book. Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is classic fiction, literary fiction. This is a modern classic, I believe, and it is literary fiction, and it also has some history in it, even though it's fictional, dealing with the grotesque, realistic scenarios that can come or do come from living a life with slavery. And so it's a fictional account based on the protagonist. I think it's pronounced Sethe, If I'm saying that correctly, I apologize, but it's like Sethe. I think it's Sethe. So Sethe was born a slave, and she escapes. And then it's like 18 years later, she's still not free. So this book, it weaves back and forth about Sethe's whole family. Her mother-in-law, her life as a slave, her children's lives, and how it impacts like everything. And it's just like layers and layers of this grief and sadness and things that happened to her, in her younger life, and then things that she's still dealing with. I guess she's kind of like in her 40s, I want to say. I'm not sure her age exactly, but it's just, her prose is just beautiful. If you've never read Toni Morrison and you love beautiful prose, you have to read her. And so she's just, her writing is so poetic, and it's just phenomenal. Another one of my favorite, probably my favorite, I'll just be honest, like my favorite modern fiction writer, contemporary fiction, if you want to call it, is Donna Tartt. This is The Little Friend. And so she's my favorite writer because I love all 3 of her books, which she's only written 3 books in her life so far. I can't wait for the next one, but she wrote The Goldfinch, The Little Friend, and then The Secret History. I loved all 3. Now, The Goldfinch is my favorite, and that always makes my all-time favorite books for my whole lifetime list. But I read The Secret History, I read The Little Friend in 2023, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. Now, I did start this book in 2022 and DNF'd it, but I kept it, of course, on my shelf. I just wasn't in the right mind space to read it at the time. It is depressing, okay. It's kind of reminds me of Beloved a little bit, not in theme, but in the way it layers a family's life. So this is a protagonist, which is a little girl, and her brother was, she tells you right on the back, like right in the beginning, her brother was found hanging from a tree, it's very dark, in her parents' yard. So his murder is still unsolved, and his sister wants to solve it. And so her name's Harriet. She is this young girl, and she's very funny. She has a very quirky personality, very funny. It's very slow in the beginning. I will warn you. That's probably why I put it down in the beginning. Also, it weaves another protagonist or a main character who is this young man. I forgot, he's like a teenager or like young adult who is like a suspect. And the parts of the book with him, I wasn't as drawn to. I just wanted to go back to Harriet. I wanted to go back to Harriet and her life, her mother, her sister, her aunts. Her great aunts were all very interesting. Also, it kind of reminded me of elderly people like I've known, and it's just very layered and rich. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Sorry, I'm rambling enough. Okay, so, and I'm really glad I finished it and picked it up again. Now, this is the author that was new to me in 2023. I might apologize if I say her name wrong, but this is Convenience Store Woman. It's Sayaka Murata, Murata. I'm not sure. She's a Japanese author. This is very short. I don't know if some people call it a novella. It's a very short novel, 163 pages, and it's tiny. It's not as big. Okay, Convenience Store Woman is very interesting. It deals with societal norms in Japan, but I also think it relates to societal norms just worldwide. It is, of course, based in Japan, and it's based on the protagonist. It's Keiko, Keiko. She doesn't feel like she fits in with her family. They're rushing her. They're pressuring her. Have a better job. Get married. Have kids. And she doesn't want that. And it's kind of about that balance between her doing what she wants to do in her life, which is literally work at a convenience store that she loves, or aim for other goals that her family and society thinks she should aim for. And I love it's also, I wouldn't say it's slow or fast paced because it's so short, but the writing is very nicely edited. She doesn't Of course, because it's so short too, like you have to be good at editing, I think, to write a novel this short that works for me. And so since it's so short, I think the pacing's really good. I think it's just very interesting about societal norms, and it's just like a very unique book in my opinion. And I don't read a lot of books like this about protagonists who are like Kiko, who kind of do their own thing, and that was refreshing. Okay, so the next book I have is, now this is a series for adults. This is Shady Hollow, a murder mystery series by Juno Black. Juno Black are two authors. It's two women that write together. Now, this is a series. I didn't bring out the whole series. I have all four of them. I'm currently reading the fourth one now. But I wanted to just show the first one because if you really like the first one, then definitely check out all of them. But it's this mystery series now. It's very, very unique. It's an animal cozy mystery series. So if you like crime, but then you're scared and you're a chicken like me, this will be a good book for you because it's not gory. It doesn't have like grotesque details about crimes because it's a cute little animal town. The main character is a fox named Vera Vixen, and she's a reporter. Now they have like police in the town, you know, they have like a coffee shop, a bookstore, all the cute little things you'd have. Kind of reminds me of like Gilmore Girls. If Gilmore Girls, like the town came to life as like a book, kind of like that. It's not, the characters aren't like warm and fuzzy. I would say it's also pretty short. It's like 218 pages. They don't do a lot. They don't do a lot of like character development. It's more plot driven. So this is one of those exceptions that is very plot driven. Now the mysteries aren't really hard to solve, but it's fun for me to solve, like to read about the cute little animals, and they're very human, of course, but if you like murder mystery series, but like you're like me, I'm too scared to read adult murder mysteries because I just like will have the image in my head of like, you know, the scene, and I can't get it out of my head and I'll have nightmares. So this is not that. I would say like this would even be something I would let my daughter read when she's like maybe a smidge older. It really doesn't have anything in it, honestly, that I thought was like scary. Okay, but I really enjoyed it, and I think you might like it if you just, okay, I talked enough about it. So, okay, now I have a YA book, but yet I think it's like very much adored by many adults. It's A Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Now, I believe it's technically a YA book because the protagonist, I believe he's like 17-ish, Holden. But I read this book when I was in college, so it's kind of a reread, but kind of not, because I literally forgot almost every single thing I read, and it was one of my favorite books in 2023 by far. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I know it's like a modern classic and so many people have read it, but I really connected with the voice and the character of Holden. I really didn't connect with him as much actually in college that I did, but then all of like the inside thoughts that he had, like he's very much like a cynic. He's very much pessimistic about society, again, about societal norms. He comes from I don't know if it's like rich, but he comes from like, you know, a family that has a little bit of money. I'm not sure if they're like rich, but I don't know if I should use the word rich, but he's definitely didn't grow up poor. I think like he's in this private school. So, but yet he's very like unlike those typical type characters, which I usually don't like connect with characters like that. I grew up very poor myself. I grew up very lower working class poor, raised by my grandparents. You know, so I don't often, like the gentleman in Moscow was an exception, but he was very humble. Holden is like, even though like no matter what, like how his family came from, I really think as a character, his voice was very interesting. I really love his thoughts and insight about society and about people. He calls people phonies a lot, which I agree. He really sees through a lot of the BS that a lot of characters don't see through, and even people. And I'm very much like that. I'm very cynical. I'm very like pessimistic, and I'm an introvert. He wants to connect with people, but he has issues connecting. I think he's neurotic, which I relate to, which I'm neurotic. He's just very interesting character. And I'm going to quit talking. I like J.D. Salinger's writing, For me, this really also wasn't as much about prose, but it was more like a character study. And it also takes place over like a few days, I believe. But he also shares a lot. Oh yeah, his like background, his childhood. It lets you know a little bit also why the way he is. He had a traumatic event happen when he was a child, well, younger. I don't know how young he was, but yeah, it's like layered and it's very interesting. And I think it's one of the most interesting books I read in 2023. Okay, another YA. I'm sorry if also the lighting's dim, you guys. I've been waiting to film videos. It's been really nasty and gloomy. And this is like the brightest it's been. Okay, S.C. Hinton, The Outsiders. I also want to remind you guys, I do video a lot of book videos that I read, my daughter reads. I also do some homeschool videos because I do homeschool my daughter. But I would love you if you subscribed, like this video. It really helps support my channel. My channel is kind of plateauing right now. I'm kind of struggling and like I want to continue to make videos, and so I want to know that I have an audience. So yeah, The Outsiders, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. This is a teeny tiny book. I want to get a bigger version of it, and it's a YA. This is one of my favorite characters of the year, Ponyboy. Ponyboy, I felt was such an interesting character. And then I really loved the also societal commentary on like, you know, class and like how like Ponyboy's family is they're poor and they're called like greasers. And then so it's his life dealing with like, you know, being raised by his older brothers, and like feeling kind of like a societal outcast, and then feeling the urge to fit in with his brothers and yet at the same time fit in with society. And like it's just a really important book about class. Her writing's awesome. I love S.C. Hinton's writing, and I really love the movie. It really paired really nicely with the book, but I know this is about books today. But yeah, now I have another YA. This is The Murderer's Ape by Jacob Wagelas. Now, I've talked about this book a lot, and it's no surprise that I have this in my favorite books of 2023. So The Murderer's Ape is one of those books where it has a little bit of everything that I enjoy. A hugely likable protagonist, which is Sally Jones, who is this gorilla. Interesting plot, beautiful writing, and it just has everything. Now, Sally Jones was captured. She doesn't remember how she became to live with humans. Now, you do find out there is a prequel. I'm going to make a separate video. I think there's like 3 books in this series. And you do find out later, but she doesn't really remember. But she does know that she was like captured. So she's not. And so she learns to read and write, but she can't talk, you know. And so she lives with humans. And so she's very sweet. She's one of my favorite characters of 2023. And she's sort of an engineer. So this book's YA, but I could say it could kind of also get away with being like middle grade-ish. I'm not sure. But so it has like these illustrations also that are beautiful. Really beautiful black and white illustrations. It has like some illustrations also like the chapter beginnings. So this book is all about, like, the plot is Sally Jones, and it's called The Murderer's Ape because she is literally referred to as the murderer's ape, because the man that is, like, her best friend, who's, like, she works with on a ship, she's, like, kind of like the engineer, co-captain, he is accused of, she calls him the chief, he is accused of murder. And so this whole book is about her trying to prove that he's innocent. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. I love it. Okay, so now a middle grade, and it's very similar because this book has way more illustrations, but they both are author illustrators. This is Brian Selznick, The Invention of Hugo Cabret. Now, I don't know what happened, but like I think I attempted to read this book from the library years ago. I don't know why I would put it down, or maybe I just wasn't focused. I don't know what happened, but I was definitely invested in reading it from front to end in 2023 because I saw the movie. I think maybe that's what like took my attention away from wanting to read it again or wanting to focus on it. But I read it from beginning to end. I think I read it in like 2 days because it's very short in words because it has so many illustrations. So this was one of my favorite books of the whole year, especially middle grade. And yeah, so it's a really beautiful book told about an orphan named Hugo, and he, like, the life that he lives, he has to fend for himself, and he, like, wants to create this, he wants to, like, complete this mechanical man that his father was working on. And he also meets this old man that runs a toy booth and makes friends with this girl his own age, and they kind of have like a brother-sister type relationship. And so it has like some engineering stuff in it. It has like a lot of things about like friendship and like the tale of an orphan and like the life that he's trying to make for himself and find like a family and belonging. And I think a lot of people would like this book, including young readers and adults. One of my favorite newly discovered authors of 2023 was Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is A Secret Garden. Now, I gave all 3 of her books 5 stars. I read Secret Garden, A Little Princess, and I read Little Lord Fauntleroy, if I'm saying that correctly. Okay, so I loved all 3, but The Secret Garden was my favorite. The Secret Garden is about this little girl. She's orphaned, Mary, and she goes to live at her uncle's house. And she meets this little boy named Dickon, who's like an animal charmer. And she also meets this other boy. This version is illustrated by Tasha Tudor. So it has some full page color illustrations. So also enjoyed the dialogue. I think that she writes a pretty realistic dialogue. That's like one thing that's like a main reason why I DNF a book is like if the dialogue's not good. And I do think she writes realistic dialogue. She writes very sweet characters. So in this story though, the character of Mary had a lot of issues in the beginning that she was dealing with, and so she really grows as a character. She doesn't start out with this little, like, she's not like the character and the main protagonist in Little Princess or Little Lord Fauntleroy. She's not like just so sweet, it's intoxicating in the beginning. She is like grows, and there's a reason why she is the way she is. And I think this one's like a little more layered than the other two because you have a little bit more of like growth with the characters and even the other characters that she meets. Not Dickens. He's just a sweet little animal charmer, Dickon. But the other character, I don't want to talk too much about him because I don't want to give anything away. But there's another like main character in this book that Mary meets, and he really grows as a character. I really related to him a lot. He's kind of a hypochondriac. I mean, it's not really his fault. It just left me with this, like, her writing does that to me. If you kind of want to read just a really sweet story, then read Frances Hodgson Burnett, where she kind of just makes you feel really good about humanity. And I really sometimes need that as a reader. And that's what she does for me. It's like a breath of fresh air, like, you're not reading something of like the sinister. I just love her writing. This was one of my favorite books I read of 2023 that was a middle grade fiction. It's Wild Oak by C.C. Harrington. So this book reminded me from the beginning a lot like Pax, if you're familiar with that story, about the fox and the boy by Sarah Pennypacker. This book also has really cool illustrations, black and white. And it's about this little girl named Maggie who she's stuttering at school, and she doesn't feel like she fits in. She's shy because she's insecure because she's stuttering. So she'll do almost anything to avoid speaking in class. And then she's threatened by her unsympathetic father to be sent away to so-called treatment. Instead, she's given the choice to go spend some time visiting her grandfather in this wild oak forest. While she's in this forest, she meets this snow leopard. And so it's like this exotic leopard cub who was abandoned. And you find out all these sinister things about the cub because like it was a gift, which like in the author's note, definitely read the author's note. She talks about her inspiration for writing this. And so it's the back and forth. One chapter is told from Maggie's perspective, and then one chapter is told from the snow leopard's perspective, and that's why it reminds me of Pax. It's the back and forth dynamic, which I think creates this very interesting pace of the novel. Same thing with Pax. It creates this back and forth where you're like, oh, what's happening with her? What's happening with the snow leopard? The animal. And if you love animal stories like I do, I think you 100% should read this. This is a chapter book. Yes, I'm an adult, and yes, it's a chapter book, but I don't care. I loved it. This was A Skull by John Klassen. It is based on a older tale, like an older fairy tale. And so it's like, of course, it has like the awesome illustrations of John Klassen, the black and white, kind of spooky. So it just is really interesting. I really love pretty much all of John Klassen's work, and this was no different. And coming from a year, looking back after when I was making this video, I really didn't have a strong year of picture books. And and this isn't like, this is more of a chapter book, but kind of like it's like illustrated, you know, kind of fits in that vibe and category. And this was just one of my favorites, and I just had to include it. And so it's kind of like about friendship, and it kind of has like this like weird vibe to it, of course, because like, you know, it's called The Skull because she finds the skull and she meets up with the skull. And like, I love how she becomes friends with the skull, kind of. And like, I just love it. And I will want to talk about the author's note. What I also loved about it is it tells you in the author's note, and it also tells you in the end, the original retelling of this tale was found in A Book of Ghosts and Goblins by Ruth Manning Sanders. So I did look that book up on Amazon. It's definitely out of print. I think it was like $80. I didn't go hardcore and look on like thrift books or eBay, but I would like to read the original. Now, he talks about how he changed it, how he found the story in a library in Alaska, and he just happened to come across the story called The Skull in the book I just mentioned. And he, in his mind, he changed it. And he talks about how, and he went with his version for this book. He changed it in his head, and then he contacted the library because he didn't remember the title. And they found it for him. And he talked about how he liked his brain's new version, and about that our brains do this with stories, and just the whole art of storytelling. And I love how he gives the original credit. He doesn't just take it as his own. And I love how he credits the original, and in the end they tell you who the original author was. And I love how he made it his own, yet still gave credit to the original. And I love that. It shows how he has integrity, and yet he's also developing the story in his own way. And it's brilliant. Okay, now the last book I have is adult fiction, but the second to last book I have is my favorite picture book of 2023. Now, this is The Most Wonderful Thing in the World, Vivian French, illustrated by Angela Barrett. I believe the author, who is Vivian French, I wasn't familiar with her work before this, but it says that her heart lies in retelling traditional stories and writing fairy tales of her own. It also says from Angela Barrett that when I was little, I loved a story called The Most Beautiful Thing in the World. I never forgot it, and years later, I found myself talking about it with Vivian French. As I did so, I realized it had the potential to be a great story for our times, and that's exactly what her retelling has turned out to be. So the illustrator mentions that The Most Beautiful Thing in the World was the story that she loved, and then that this is a retelling. But it didn't say it it didn't say it in the credits, and it didn't say it in the beginning. So I was a little bit confused on why that wasn't mentioned. Yeah, but this is about, I'm sorry, let me get to the point. This is about A king and a queen, they promise to marry their daughter to the young man who can show them the most wonderful thing in the world. So suitors arrive at the palace one after the other with elaborate gifts, but nothing quite feels right to the overwhelmed majesties. So only when a young man who isn't a suitor at all steps forward that the king and queen finally understand what the most wonderful thing in the world is. So I'm not going to say what it is to spoil it, but that's the premise. And the illustrations are really phenomenal. They remind me of these like old, I don't know if you want to say like Renaissance-ish, or like just kind of like 1800s like paintings, like realistic. They're beautiful. I really like the way that they're done. The colors are very like soft pastels, and the story's really interesting. I really like fairy tales as an adult, and I just found this book beautiful, and I found the story very interesting. I think it'd be a very good gift. It has like a really interesting message at the end. It's kind of like anti-materialistic and anti-consumerism type message. It's very beautiful. And I don't want to give the ending away or anything, but you could probably find it at your library. But I loved it. And yes, I would like to know more about the origins since the illustrator mentions it, but I'm curious. Okay. So my number one favorite book of 2023 is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I'm not sure how she pronounces it. Okay. I was reluctant to read this book because I haven't had a lot of luck with books that are so popular and commercial. Sometimes I'll reserve those books for my library and I'll wait months and months or weeks, however long it takes, and then I get them and I'm disappointed. So this book was no different. I reserved it and it took forever. But then I got it from the library and I loved it. Oh my gosh, it is just beautiful writing. Her prose is beautiful. The dialogue is realistic. In my opinion, there's a very interesting plot. It's also character driven. It has every single thing on my checklist. It's about Kaya, who's one of my favorite protagonists ever. And she's very sensitive, very smart. She's kind of like a naturalist. She loves where she lives, which is the marsh, like on the North Carolina coast. She is accused of a crime, but that is not the main focus of the book. And that's actually why I was reluctant to pick it up. Because I was like, I'm not really big into reading crime stories. I thought it was going to be too like dark or too focused on that. No, there is a crime that takes place in it, but it's very mild. Like, it's honestly not focused on that at all. It's more focused about a character study of Kaya. She grows up very hard life, living alone on the marsh. Her friends are pretty much like the birds and the wildlife around her. And then it's like a coming of age story. It's beautiful. This book made me cry. I'll just say it. Like, I literally had 2 parts in it that made me cry. It's so heartbreaking about her life, what she overcomes. I loved her as a character. She's very sweet. She's very, like, you root for her. Like, I just, like, wanted her to, like, have a good life. And it's, like, realistic also in the way I related a lot to her childhood. So I did connect with her on a personal level about some of the stuff she went through. And then, just like I said, like, the writing's beautiful. And, like, it has a lot about nature. So if you like nature, if you like character studies, this is also her first novel, the author. She's a wildlife scientist, so it's no surprise of why there's so much nature in this book. And she studies zoology, and she has a PhD in animal behavior. But this is, like, I believe, her first novel. So I believe she wrote other nonfiction. And for a first novel, I just found it phenomenal. Like, just phenomenal. So I can't, like, say much more about it other than to say it's just beautiful. I also watched the movie. I didn't, like, adore the movie. I thought the movie was great. I didn't think it was, like, phenomenal. I thought it was good. I liked pairing it after I finished the book. But, yeah, So this is my list so far, you guys, of 2023. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please subscribe if you're not already. If you are, thanks so much, and like this video really helps me. I appreciate everyone who watches. Have a good day or night. Bye.